everyone, and welcome to another exciting session of the Get On Point series. And today, joining me is Stephen, and we'll be talking about dimensions in Business Central. Hi,
Hello,
Steve.
everyone. Hi, thanks for the introduction.
Good to have you.
So, obviously,
Good to
dimensions are very important. So, really
Yeah,
excited to jump into it.
exactly. So, I would like to know first and foremost, what's dimension? What does it mean? What are dimensions?
So, I usually like to compare dimensions to like flags. So, we have a company, and the company we need to segment it into whatever it is. Now, when I say whatever it is what are the key areas or what are the key matters that we would like to compartmentalize our company. So it will be by product, for example, it will be by department, or even possibly by location. So all of this defines sort of how we look into the company. And also out of that information and out of the need to extrapolate reports from our information, we then define the dimensions which are to be set up within our company.
So that's at least a breakdown of dimension, but want to know where do we start from? We have businesses here that have probably more than one company, so they have company within another company. So where do they start from when implementing dimensions in Business Central?
Very good. So in order like to make this easier and like moving away from theory and immediately go into practice, let me add the business center, which we are all familiar with. So where do we start from? The very basic step is setting up the dimensions. So when we speak of dimensions, we need to simply go to the dimensions table. We define each and every dimension, but it's more than that. Over and above the dimensions, we need to define the what we refer to as dimension values. So for example, if I had to go to cost center and I go to dimension values, I get the following dimensions, right? And this has to take place for each and every dimension. So we need to differentiate between dimension, which is the type of dimension, and dimension values, which are the different dimensions within that type of values. One other very important thing to notice is that dimension values, similar to our chart of accounts, it's also segmented by dimension value type. The most common ones are begin total, standard, and then total, which in practice it enables us to create groups within our dimensions. And you have mentioned a very important question, which is sort of whether it actually influences all our companies, especially
Exactly.
when we have multi-company setup, like most of our clients actually. And, and the answer is no. So these setups are to be defined at each company. So we can have companies which is more focused on the product, another company which is more focused on the departments. We can have companies which have multiple um, multiple combination of these. One other important point that we need to identify and that also changes per company is what we refer to as um, global dimensions. And these are defined in our general ledger setup. The general ledger setup um, over here, we have got the dimensions and also shortcut dimensions. Nowadays, Business Central allows us to define up to 8 dimensions, and obviously, this helps us greatly in defining all the dimensions, all the categorization throughout our business center.
Okay, that's nice. So we've gotten how it impacts on the company, but want to know, are there other key setups? So are there key setup we need to put in place in each company or before we implement it fully for seamless operations?
Very good. So we have already mentioned dimensions and dimension values and share setups. Those are the very base setups. What we need also to bear in mind is that there are what we refer to as default dimensions. Usually, these are dimensions attributed to entities like customers, fixed assets, vendors. even items, and so on and so forth. And therefore, these are dimensions which are automatically inherited in all our transactions, as well as GL account. I'd like to actually showcase this part of the GL account as unfortunately too many times we tend to sort of forget about it or put it on the side, I must say. So let me switch back to Business Central. So I'm in the chart of accounts, which I'm sure that all our viewers actually are very familiar with. What's very important to realize is that every account can have a number of dimensions set up. If I have to go to J account and dimension multiples, I am allowed to actually set up the dimensions. What's very important is that for every dimension, so let's say, for example, let's say cost center, I can decide on three types of options. Code mandatory, where um, I am forcing the user to input a dimension. Same code, where I'm asking the user that not only that the dimension is defined, for example, cost center, but also that we say that every posting within the terminal account is to be, for example, 10200. The other option that we have is no code, where we're forcing the user not to input a code. As a matter of fact, over here we're stating that we can't have a dimension value code if value posting is no code. So it's very important that whenever we set no code, we don't have a dimension value code. If it is empty, like this, there is no rule. So the user is free to decide whether to input a dimension or otherwise. However, let me point out that this is a very important setup. So if I had to go back to the chart of accounts, and let's say I do filter totals by cost center, and let me filter on net change not equal to zero, right? These are all my accounts which have a balance so far. As soon as I input cost center filter, for example, 1 out of 100, I have these entries. However, if I input, for example, pool cost centers, I have nothing. So so what I would try to say is that these
Yeah.
dimensions are very important because when we're setting filters, we can then define very key information, and therefore, out of all the data as a company, you can actually extrapolate, for example, profit and loss and even balance sheets. And this is a clear example of how we can actually make use of dimensions, in this case, in our chart of accounts.
Wow, that's very extensive. Um, I think we've seen some of the setup, and most of our viewers are already familiar with the BC interface. But what's next now? So after knowing this, what are other things we probably must have skipped when it comes to dimension? So what next?
So in the next sessions, we'd like to showcase a new add-on that we have been working on here at Onpoint, which is called Vendor Dimensions. Add-on
Okay.
some practice where a dimension is automatically allocated to suppliers if we could bear in mind how many suppliers we're creating and the room for whenever we're manually setting up a default dimension to supplier, we can truly appreciate how important such an add-on can be for our day-to-day operations. But in actual fact, we got to see this in more detail in the next session. So yeah, so that is something which we're very keen about. This has come about based on the feedback that we got from all our most of our clients, and therefore we're very keen to actually showcase it in the next session.
That's nice. So we've gotten heads up from Steve. Onpoint has launched a vendor dimension, and I know all of you would like to see that. So we might not be able to take everything now, but in the next episode of Get a Point, we'll be able to go extensively into vendor dimension. We thank you for bringing out time to meet with us today, and we wish you all a great time. Thanks for joining, and have a great day. Bye.